Hello and welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic flavour design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann, and today on the show, we're going to run it right back with Michelle Rapp, who is back to talk about the New Capenna stories, both the main 5 and also an extra one on top, where we're going to be talking through the ins and outs of the characters, the story beats and what they mean for the future of Magic story, and maybe a little bit of conspiracy theorising as well. But before we get to that, obviously, I'm going to do a little bit of a preamble ramble. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about the new Secret Lair that was announced. Secret Lair time again. As long-time listeners of the show will know, Nathan and I had often tried to do like every Secret Lair and talk about all the flavour that you could find in them. But gosh, there are just so many. And honestly, a lot of the flavour just boiled down to, yeah, I like it. No, I didn't like it. And so maybe not as heavy on that. But the reason I'm talking about this one was because they've really gone all in on individual artists. We've seen this in more recent sets where they'll give artists like a showcase, and it's a really nice way of having maybe long-time Magic artists or some guest artists come in and shake up the game, maybe try their hand at something that they don't usually do as well. And I'm really excited about this particular set because in this Super Drop, we've got 4 artists in total. We have Magali Villeneuve and Wayne Reynolds, who obviously have both been guests on this show. We have Siddharth Chakravarty and also a guest artist in the form of Matt Dukes, who's a contemporary artist. The Matt Dukes one is really interesting. Just to touch on it, it's 5 lands, Glacial Fortress, Drowned Catacomb, Dragon Skull Summit, Rootbound Crag, and Sun Petal Grove. Are they the Czech lands? I don't know what the shorthand for those ones are, but the art style is really, I mean, it's a bit divisive, I think. I love it. It's kind of like minimalist contemporary sort of art style, almost like paper cutouts. I don't think they are paper cutouts, but it really puts me in mind of like early Matisse, if you're a big Matisse fan. Early Matisse or late Matisse? Late Matisse. I misspeak. Late Matisse. And I love them. But the ones that I really want to talk about is the Magali Villeneuve Secret Lair, because we get another Magali land. There are only 3 lands in Magic the Gathering, illustrated by Magali Villeneuve. One of them is the backside of Search for Azcanta, which is Azcanta, the Sunken Ruin. So obviously that was in the main set that you could buy. She also did Secret Foundry, which was another Secret Lair drop when all of the shock lands got done by different artists. I think Nathan and I spoke about that one. This one's a basic forest. The first ever Magali Villeneuve basic land, and you can see the influences of a lot of pop culture that Magali absorbs. Like, you can go back and listen to that episode, and we talk a lot about Princess Mononoke and a lot about Studio Ghibli. And I know on things like Twitter and social media, Magali's not been quiet about how much they love the Zelda Breath of the Wild game, for example. And you can see all of those influences in this artwork. It kind of shows like a mix of like wood carvings and real obviously illustration, but foliage in the foreground with the wood carving in the background. And yeah, absolutely beautiful. A lot of the shapes of the clouds especially, and the kind of style of the fox really puts me in mind of Breath of the Wild. So yeah, I mean, I absolutely love it. My gripe, however, and it's kind of the gripe that I've had with Secret Lairs for a while, I've sort of softened on them as a product. I'm still not thrilled. I've never bought one outright. I've bought singles from Secret Lairs. Is that it's really fun to see artists to have a bit of room to breathe. Like the Wayne Reynolds Secret Lair are all legendary dwarf characters done in Wayne's unmistakable art style, and they look like they're ripped straight from Wayne's work on Pathfinder, of which a lot of the characters are dwarves. So it's a really nice like high fantasy look for dwarves, but they're hidden behind a paywall. Right. Now, I know we can't have everything all the time, and God knows there's way too many art styles in the main sets. I don't know, there's just something behind my eyes that kind of doesn't love the fact that these really evocative new art styles done by established artists are kind of hidden in this extra product, if you like. And it still makes it even more so that you can't buy them at LGSs, just a little bit, I don't know, there's still that little bit of a ache there. But the fact that they exist, the fact that you could potentially buy them as singles if you really wanted to, I mean, yeah, they're great. Anyway, that's all. We've got a lot to talk about in this episode, so I'm just going to jump straight to it. Here's my chat with Michelle. And today, we are running it back with the marvellous maestro of Vorthos lore, that is Michelle Rapp. Welcome back, Michelle.
You're so kind. Thank you so much for having me back. It's a real pleasure to discuss these with you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I enjoyed our chat so much last time and we were already talking about Capenna, even though we moved on to talking about a wildly different story in a completely different plane for the body of the last episode. But obviously, like, Capenna's here, and not only are so we're talking about the structure, the story today, and all the story articles, and as you can probably infer from the title of the episode that you're about to listen to, dear listener. But I kind of feel, I don't know how you feel, this is just kind of a general broad Magic thing, that people were so hyped for Neon Dynasty, for Kamigawa, that the rest of like the year's set releases were kind of like, yeah, sure, like whatever, like people weren't thinking about them at all. And then when the hype train barreled on through to New Capenna, like, I was not expecting anyone to be anywhere near as fussed about this set, but everyone loves this set. Like, it's erupted, and like I was really shocked at just how much New Capenna has really captured people's imaginations. Like, I don't know how you feel as like a Magic player.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I suppose from a very biased perspective, I was very excited to hear about this plane. I was very
Sure.
curious to hear about, to learn about how they would pull it off. As an American, and also as someone who really loves the 1920s and 30s, that era of American history, it is. I was just really interested to see what Magic would do, and I think that's sort of it speaks a lot to the genius and the flexibility of the color pie, right? Because you can really take that sort of the core main five philosophies of the colors and apply them to almost any context, and you'll get exactly like where something might fall. So I was really excited to see what would happen. And I mean, who doesn't love who doesn't love like The Great Gatsby, who doesn't love like the Art Deco aesthetic of the age? It is, I think it's a very also quintessentially American set in a lot of ways. So that was also something I think a lot of creators were very interested in, especially the ones that are based here in North America.
Yeah, for sure. And we were just talking just before I kind of started the episode proper about the fact that when we last spoke, we were really excited about the stories, and the stories had literally just dropped. As almost as we hit record, I was getting messages, people being like, "Oh, the stories have just hit. The stories have just hit." And we were sort of discussing what our sort of expectations were versus the execution, and we'll get into like maybe the nitty gritty of like the narrative and like the individual characters after we do like the story breakdown. But broadly speaking, I think you were saying that in our chats before we hit record that maybe the structure of the 5 main episodes and then some side stories maybe wasn't as equipped to tell this little narrative as, say, it has been for some of the other like stories that we've gotten. Like, what are your
I
thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there is, I've been really getting I'm sort of settling into this new story structure. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel so old thinking about like just 4 years ago with, Ixalan's story where we had 10, 12
Yeah,
stories per
exactly.
set.
Yeah.
And they were all focused on the main storyline for the most part. It was and then for a while we had the whole Greg Weisman thing, and then we had the paid novellas. So lore has been through so much tumult in the past couple of years that I think I'm finally starting to settle into this 5 main stories, 5 side stories structure, which I think works okay. I think that they are definitely dipping into the best of both worlds, given what they've learned in the past 3 to 4 years. And gosh, even just thinking about, I'm like, wild. This is wild. Like, I can't believe that it's gone through so many shifting changes. So I do think that a 5-part story structure, narratively speaking,
Yeah.
can be tricky. Um, if we just take a step back and look at how, at least within the Western world, how we have structured our stories. There, we look at, Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, the rise, the fight, the final climax, the denouement. There are certain beats that we are used to within a narrative structure, and knowing that it's going to be a story told in 5 acts definitely, I think, gives us all some sort of expectation as to how we think these are going to be done. And so that's already one giant order to fill, right? If you're like a service staff member or a line cook, you're like, okay, that's one big thing I gotta make. You gotta get that story structure down, gotta get that basic narrative. And then on top of that, you've also got to do an intense amount of world building, and it's not your world. These are writers who have been contracted to create these stories. They are trying to bring to life a world of a lot of other people's imaginings. And it's both a blessing and a curse, right? Because on one hand, you don't need to do all this world building by yourself. Like, as someone who's done many D&D campaigns where I homebrew things, it can be nice to just have something put on your plate and run with it.
Yeah,
on
sure.
On the other hand, though, it's like because these worlds are so intricate, the world building Bibles, as I understand, for these sets are easily hundreds of pages. It becomes a real challenge to sort of encapsulate all of it within these stories. It is difficult. It is so tricky. And as a result, I think that so that's another really, really tall order. And then last but not least, you've got a whole legacy of characters that you've got to bring over from everything else. Like, for Elise Kova's case of the New Capenna, she is not only having to fulfill these basic story beats, also trying to establish a new world we've never been to before, but also carrying on the stories of these characters that we have grown to know and love for so many years. Elspeth is an incredibly nuanced individual, like character, as is Vivian. We are, and Orabrask, we are playing with a real legacy here. And so I think these are just the 3 that come to top of mind that I think are the 3 biggest things that these authors have to deal with. I mean, I'm not even going into things like word constraints. So it's a really big order. I think in some sets it works really well. In some sets it doesn't. And in many ways, I think it is entirely dependent on the skill set of the writer they have contracted.
Yeah.
So I don't, and like I said, like, I think that it's and just to elaborate further, I don't think that it's the author's fault necessarily.
No.
If the 5 stories they've been contracted to create aren't, don't quite meet all the marks. I just think, there are a lot of writers out there with very many different strengths and weaknesses. So it is difficult to thread that needle.
It is, as you were saying, like, these writers are contracted, and whether they are maybe a bit more invested in the game as a product, like Chaos Noel Rivera, who did the Innistrad stories, and indeed, I think did a side story for this one, is a big Magic player. So they get a lot more kind of insight, maybe just from a baseline. But it is so rare that it is anything to do with a lot of like structural issues, unless the writer is just objectively bad, which they are very rarely are if they're being contacted by a conglomerate like WotC or like, by Hasbro to write their stories. It's very rare that they're just flat bad writers. It does happen. But usually it's, it's to do with, as you say, like story structure, word count, when they want to release these stories and what structure they want to do it. So yeah, I will say that I think I did notice with the 5 story structure that a lot of stuff got missed out. And although we do have the side stories to kind of fill those gaps, it is hard sometimes to not miss them in the main narrative. I felt this way when we first had this structure introduced during Coldheim. I believe it was Coldheim that was the first one. Because they had 10 realms in that plane to kind of go into. What the madness, absolute madness. So they can't obviously do that in the 5 stories, but then even in the side stories, because I think they were still finding their feet, the first 2 were focusing on like a whole new character as well, in Nico Aris, and then the last 3 were like, and then we might go to another couple of realms, but there were whole sections of that world that didn't get any story whatsoever.
Oh, absolutely.
And I definitely felt that here, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I remember there was a tweet done by the professor where he's like, name the 10 realms of Kaldheim. And it was like, I don't know, Mordor,
Yeah.
Rivendell, Hogwarts. It's like
Exactly.
just all
Yeah.
these, like, no one. It's so, and that's a shame. I feel like, I mean, that's one of the reasons I think we all look forward to returning to some of these places, because
Mm.
what is the dwarven realm like in Kaldheim? I want to know. I
Exactly.
mean,
I'm so glad. Yeah, that's exactly the one where I always think, I was like, we didn't even go there. They're such a big part of the lore, and we don't have
yeah,
no idea.
it's huge. Like, they make cool things.
Yeah.
I think one of them made a really cool sword. Like, we
Yeah,
just don't
a
talk
sword
about it.
that is the MacGuffin of that entire. Anyway, that's Caldon. That's Caldon. I think, but then, if you have 5 families, which you'd think just on a optics view would fit so neatly into 5 of the main story like articles, like 5 and 5, it kind of matches up. You don't then want to constrain your writers to being like, well, you have to hit every family in every single one of these stories. Like, so it's tough, right? But I
It
will say, I
is.
did enjoy the pacing. The flip side of it, I think, is that whilst the narrative was maybe a bit compressed and we didn't get a lot of insight into some things in these main 5 stories, the fact that it was so fast paced because it had to hit the story beats, I felt personally reading it really suited a lot of the set pieces and the kind of flow of the narrative following Elspeth's journey, especially in the last couple of stories, which we'll do a story breakdown in a minute, but where, the kind of second act into third act kind of like shake up of the narrative, like really paced on through, and you weren't lingering on any one sort of setting or set piece. It felt very rapid, it felt very breathless, which is what the narrative kind of desired, right? So I think it can work against a lot of the stories, this kind of 5 episode structure, if you like.
Yes, and we'll get into it, but it is a lot of things to hit. It's a lot of stuff to take care of, and
Mm.
I mean, as far as I can tell, Elise definitely hit most of those marks. I mean, there were a couple that I think we'll get into that I wish we just had a bit more time, a bit more room
Mm.
to breathe. But such is Magic Story, and I. But like, it's also kind of exciting because Shauna McGuire's story was just Tangles from I think Crimson Vow
Yes.
got nominated for Hugo, which is very exciting.
Yeah. I mean, that story, we actually did a book club episode on that exact article, and it's just because that, funnily enough, was a story that was so quiet in its like actual like bulk. Like, there's very little like conflict on like a planar scale. Do you know what I mean? Whereas so many of these story arcs in Magic are so concerned with like, this plane's about to blow up, and how do we stop it from blowing up? And it's always a world-ending event. But Tangles was such a quiet, like sort of very thoughtful story just between Teferi and Ren that it just shows that these stories are deep enough, and there is enough in Magic. Of course, there's enough in Magic to tell a wide variety of stories. So yeah, it's cool.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to dive into a story breakdown of the main 5 story articles. We are also going to touch, for narrative's sake, on one of the side stories, the Side of Freedom, which focuses on Urabrask. But these are the kind of main 5 story article overview. So here we go. Deep breath. This might take a couple of minutes, but here we go. Okay, we open with directly a flashback into Elspeth and her point of view at the Temple of the Gods on Theros. And this is the moment where Heliod is killing Elspeth and turning coat on Elspeth with her own weapon, and we see Elspeth's last thoughts as she slips into the Throsian underworld. So it's immediately going, this is going to be an Elspeth story, but here's the kind of last, well, not the last, because we did see them in Theros Beyond Death, but one of the last times we had a big sort of Elspeth story beat. We then cut straight forward to the present time, to New Capenna, the plane where this is all going to be set on, and we are entering the Museum of the Maestros, one of the 5 New Capennan families, which is the heads of the criminal underworld. There is apparently a government on New Capenna. Doesn't get given any sort of story relevance because it's not relevant to the plane, but to be a criminal organization. I think the Vorthos cast did an excellent episode on this of like, what is organized crime? To be organized crime, you need to be organized against something. So here we go. We are focusing on Lord Xander, who is the head of the Maestros, and his right-hand deacon, Anello, and they are discussing grave matters on the plane, including the return of an old enemy, known only as the Adversary, who has been splintering off Maestro foot soldiers to join them, and also news from the Cabaretti, a rival criminal family, who have found a new source of Halo being the main commodity on Capenna. Xander wishes Anello to investigate what the source may be. We also have a first look at Xander's collection in the Museum of the Maestros, which contains a lot of the histories of New Capenna, and we gain a sense that the metropolis has some sort of hidden past. We then move on to the Cabaretti headquarters and a conversation between their leader, Jetmir, and his right hand, Ginny. And they are preparing to have a giant party called the Crescendo, which is a yearly gala thrown for all of the families of New Capenna. But this one apparently will seemingly be the greatest of all, and will be the unveiling of their new font, which is a new source of Halo. Or we have, however, we have no idea at this point what that actual font is. Lastly, for the first episode at least, we see the Planeswalker Vivian arrive on New Capenna, and as they're observing the Plains factions and goings on and kind of absorbing it all in, they are met seemingly at random by a fellow Planeswalker called Tezzeret, who obviously we all know and love, despise, I don't know. However you want to organize with Tezzeret. The two then go on to meet Tezzeret's contact on the plane, who is revealed to be the rogue Phyrexian praetor, Urabrask, who we all assumed at this point Urabrask was dead, right? That was
we all thought he was dead.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there we go. Urabrask is around. We then move to episode 2. And the story refocuses on Elspeth, which is who we will stay with for the majority of the story line, who is now on New Capenna. And New Capenna was described to them by their friend, Planeswalker Ajani, to be potentially their original home plane. And Elspeth has been making ends meet on the plane by doing odd jobs and kind of service jobs, just to kind of get a feel for what the plane is all about.
She works at the cleaners.
She works, like a laundromat, right? Which is crazy. I mean, it's also, I really like the idea, we'll get into this in the character thing, but for so much of this story, Elspeth doesn't have, a weapon, and for a character that's so joined with whatever weapon they might have, be it the Shadow Spear or God's End or whatever, to have this character suddenly just be oh, I'm literally just using my fists for 90% of the storyline is quite a thing.
Or a rebar.
Or like a rebar, as we see in their scuffle with some Maestro vampires. So Elspeth's kind of first interaction with the families of New Capenna is they get set upon by a group of Maestro vampires who Elspeth fights off with a big rod of rebar. And when Elspeth defeats all of these vampires, Anello, who we met in the previous story, meets her and invites her to join the family, which Elspeth begrudgingly agrees to do after Anello gives her some insight into the statues around the city. So we have these kind of descriptions of a lot of the architecture of Capenna is statues of angels, and one statue in particular shows an angel fighting what Elspeth recognizes as a Phyrexian. So to gain more insight into what this mysterious past of Capenna might be, Elspeth joins the Maestros. In the epilogue for this episode, we also see the adversary talking to an underling spy about what the font could in fact be, and we find out in this little epilogue that the adversary is in fact Ob Nixilis, as if we didn't see Ob Nixilis on all of the marketing materials for this set.
It's a very, I think I tweeted about this, but I think it's a very Pinky in the Brain moment where it's well, boss, what are we going to do tonight? Same thing we do every night. Turns around, it's Ob Nixilis.
Yeah, exactly.
Trying to take over New Capenna.
I mean, the story beats, as you say, they did hit certain things, and there are certain points where I was obviously this is ripped out of every piece of media about sort of crime families where you have these kind of big windows and the mob boss staring out of it, and it's just, I don't know, it's cliche but in the best way possible. So
absolutely. No, I loved it. It was great. It was a very I like it. I actually felt like it was a very Batman the Animated Series. I don't know if you've seen that from the 90s. Masterpiece of animation. We'll defend it till I die.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, this is Batman original series on Magic cards, and I'm absolutely here for it.
Oh yeah, no, it's great.
In episode 3, we see that Elspeth has been working with Maestros for quite some time, a few weeks, maybe a month, and is getting quite close to their leader, Xander. She's been doing grunt work, such as tailing informants, making delivery drops, etc. We see kind of the scuffles that she gets in those kind of little trips. She fights a bunch of raccoon folk, which I don't know if any other plane has raccoon folk, at least not to my knowledge.
This is our first time. We got some Trash Panda people.
Yeah, really cool.
I mean, I guess
cool.
actually Bablovia might have it.
This is a point of contention on this podcast. Nathan's a big defender of the unsets, and I don't consider them to be to influence
Canon.
anything. Yeah, well, not canon, I guess. Like, I enjoy them, but yeah. So, all right, okay, maybe we'll see. Maybe
I mean, that's the only other instance I can think of where we see them. I can't. I don't want to wade into the controversy as to whether or not is.
It's not a real controversy. You can have anything in the unsets. I think it's just my problem with them. But yes, so we see that she's been doing work for Xander, and over time, she's been getting his trust. With every job that she does, Xander kind of gives her a little bit more tidbit into the history of New Capenna. Like, he offers her like rank and gold and all this kind of thing, but it's the information about the plane that she wants. And obviously, Xander's museum is exactly where is the right place to get it. Along the way as well, during one of these jobs, she meets up with Vivian, and the two recognize her as Planeswalkers. Their partnership doesn't form fully there, but now they're aware of each other on the plane. So that's kind of a cool little insight. We also learn during one of these little lessons with Xander that it was the 5 demon leaders, one for each family, were given their status by the old demon lords of the plane after a broken pact with the angels who built the city. So we get this idea that, much like many other planes in the multiverse, the hidden history of New Capenna involves demons and angels and some massive conflict between the two of them. He also offers a halo for the first time, which is described as a gift from the angels, and it seems to have incredible magical properties. She drinks it, but I think halo is kind of just a substance which can be kind of imbibed in many different ways. And Elspeth starts to suspect that halo could in fact be the key to defending the multiverse against the Phyrexians. Xander tells Elspeth that the families offer balance to the city and that the font and the adversary could disrupt this. So, as one final job for the Maestros before having full access to his archives, Elspeth is to infiltrate the Cabaretti to find out what the font actually is. We then move to the night of the crescendo, and Xander sends Anello to the party without him, signaling that something is about to go down. Anello has a kind of thought. You see Anello sort of thinking, well, if Xander, the head of the Maestro family, isn't at the party, then something must be going on. Elspeth is now really in league with the Cabaretti, especially with their right hand, Ginny, and discovers that the font is actually a young girl named Giada, who can produce halo with her magic. When Giada demonstrates this power at the crescendo, chaos suddenly erupts, and is revealed that the adversary has in fact infiltrated each one of the families and now has the kind of overwhelming majority of force on the plane. Elspeth steals Giada away and vows to protect her, and has to fight her way through the city and its warring factions to safety. During the chaos, Ob Nixilis makes his move against the family's leaders, including Xander, and after a brief fight, kills the Lord of the Maestros. Elspeth and Giada meet up with Vivian, and after many twists of loyalty and fighting between the families, finally find some sanctuary in a cathedral, which is seemingly a monument to the old angels of Capenna. Both Giada and Elspeth seem to emit an ethereal glow when entering, highlighting or kind of alluding to potentially who they are, because there's lots of themes in this story about home and feeling at peace with who you are. Ob Nixilis tracks them down to the cathedral, and whilst Vivian fights his underlings, Elspeth fights Ob Nixilis to keep him away from Giada. However, Elspeth is about to fall to Ob Nixilis. Giada's true form as an angel is revealed just at the last moment, and she bestows Elspeth with a halo-infused sword, which Elspeth then uses to almost defeat Ob before he planeswalks away. Giada then appears to ascend to wherever angels go on New Capenna. I was about to say heaven, but that's not heaven. You know what I mean. And Elspeth and Vivian return to the Maestro's Museum with Anello now the head of the family. Anello reveals that Xander's last wish for Elspeth was to have full access to the archives. So now Elspeth, with the full knowledge that Xander had about the plane and its history, is confident that Halo is potentially the key to beating the Phyrexians. So she and Vivian, at the very tail end of the story, go to Dominaria to share their weapon with Ajani and the rest of the Gatewatch. So, I mean, a lot of story beats. Obviously, I've condensed it wildly down there, but pretty story breaking relevant things happening in this one, which we haven't quite gotten in the past sort of few sets. They've really ramped up the kind of importance to the larger story arc here, right?
Absolutely. It is, I mean, I really enjoy these 5 stories. I thought that we
Mm.
got a really fantastic perspective into New Capenna, and I feel like I got a very I guess with the side stories, I got a pretty decent look into each of the 5 families, except for
Mm.
one, which we'll talk about. But, but yeah, I thought it was, done about as well as can be given, I guess, the constraints, and so it was really, I really loved the pace of it. I
Mm.
loved, sort of the descriptions. I loved the mirroring. I love Xander. I
Xander's
just
great.
Xander is so great. I mean, let's be real. I would join the Maestros in an instant. Like,
Yeah, I've noticed this on Twitter. You are a big Maestros fan, and like,
I'm a huge Maestros fan, mostly because one, I love museums, and two, I love
right.
art, and three, I like collecting these things. And so, I like making art. I like collecting art. It is, I think, very easy for me to slip into that family if I were ever on the plane. But yeah, I really love how the story does push back
Mm.
on Elspeth's own idea of because basically on who she thinks she is,
Mm.
because for the first time, I mean, Elspeth is a classic paladin character. She was
Mm.
trained that way on Bant. She had to leave when Bant became like joined together with Grixis, and she I mean, even in her time on Theros, like she was always looking for a very monocolor expression of herself, not compromising any of her values. And then
Mm.
I think the unfortunately we didn't really get to see very much of the story of Theros beyond death, but I think it was a very
Mm.
fitting place to start, with of Heliod just straight up killing her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is someone that she's trusted for a really long time, mono white character, and now she's in a world where everything is run by demons, and so she has to start working in shades of gray if she
Mm.
wants to get to what she wants. If she wants to
Yeah.
get to what she needs in order to um, defeat the incoming Phyrexian threat, which is super interesting. And I love
Mm.
that she has this almost like parental um relationship with Lord Xander. Like Lord Xander's like makes her out immediately, knows that she's not like the other girls,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and accommodates that. I
Yeah.
think that was really cute. I really enjoyed that relationship.
Yeah, Xander is really sort of emblematic of uh, the approach that they took to these 5 families in general. I think because very often, obviously, the way the stories are structured, you have like the good quote unquote side and the bad quote unquote side, and the conflict between them. And obviously, the more kind of morally grey aspects to either side you can put into, the more interesting narratives and stories become. So when they were going to do a set which was based specifically around 5 like unquestionably criminal organizations, our sense of justice and right and wrong is obviously sort of skewing towards that. Oh, these are going to be like a whole bunch of antagonists, like how can we make these things relatable or have any sort of like righteousness about them? And I think they did a great job with Xander, and indeed all the other sort of criminal factions where we meet, where it's not about causing crime for exploitation, it's about causing crime for balance. Do you know what I mean? Like in a kind of weird way, and as much as they can express it, and having characters that are sympathetic or thoughtful or not cruel for the sake of being cruel. In sort of, Jetmir and Xander and Nello, who these are all assassins and killers and, mob families, but they're not cruel because they enjoy being cruel. And any time that you see foot soldiers maybe getting a bit overzealous, you see these kind of more family heads, reining them in. And I think that's a really smart decision and a really good way to have someone as morally just as Elspeth relate to an objectively sort of not evil, but like amoral character, I suppose, without it being sort of like wildly against her own sort of character and perception.
Mhm.
I think it was just a really smart move because I was all up for having a set which you followed the antagonists or the anti-heroes around, and they absolutely delivered that like 100%.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was. I think they really did a lot of fantastic research. I mean, these are I mean, when you look at the real world, when we look at why these families, these organizations occur,
Mm.
like even with like terrorist organizations, for example, like past like this like the PLO. And these organizations are created because there is a vacuum within the system as it stands,
Mm.
for these individuals to, where people aren't getting what they should be getting. They aren't
Mm.
getting what they're entitled to, whether that be roads, better schools, food, jobs, things like that, things that we all need to basically eke out a meager existence, a basic existence. These are not things. And so that's, I think when that's a really great successful part of New Capenna, as you pointed out,
Mm.
the fact they managed to really encapsulate the heart, this very crucial aspect of organized crime.
Mm.
um and just, any kind of, I mean, we even see it in West Side Story, right? Like with the Jets versus the Sharks.
Yeah.
They and I think everyone has seen like the new Steven Spielberg version. They really kind of flesh out the Sharks, I think, really, not the Jets really well too. Like, it's not that the Jets are just, yeah, they are racist assholes,
Mm.
but they're also seeing a good portion of what they believe to be, their territory, their turf, the world that
Mm.
they've known being taken away. And I think that is also kind of scary. So it's a really great insight, lore building wise, world building wise, into why we make these decisions and why they're so relatable. It's why the greatest mafia movies like we can think of, like The Godfather,
Mm.
who absolutely, Don Corleone is absolutely Lord Xander, um which is why I think I love him so much. I just see
Yeah.
him like, Marlon Brando, you're there. So yeah, I have to applaud the Wizards of the Coast for really, really getting through and really encapsulating, because yeah, there's like, it's fun to like just imagine walking into a place and with a Tommy gun and some dynamite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for
But
sure.
we also have to think about the why they're doing this. It's not sadism. It's because this is the only way they know how to make sure that the people they care about are given what they need.
Yeah, when Elspeth questions Xander as to what his justifications are and the other leaders of the family's justifications are for perpetuating this cycle of crime and structure, I think it was something, I'm paraphrasing the words, but I really liked it. It was, Xander says, we do have conflict, but we always operate within each other's budget. So the fact that Ob Nixilis is coming down and basically exploiting the plane for whatever deeds he's going to do, and then pisses off to whatever other plane he wants to go to,
We don't know.
yeah, we don't know. Like, who knows? But like, it's the fact that Xander's going, yeah, this structure is maybe a bit broken and there's some cracks in the system, but it's our system. This is how we operate, and for the most part, everyone has a role to play. Like, he gives people who maybe don't have purpose, and obviously the morally grey aspects of this from our perspective in our real world is the fact that he gives them purpose to become foot soldiers in his family, but he treats them with respect if they are respectful. And so to have this font which might tip the balance, and this outsider who's going to come in and strip the plane, who, I mean, I say outsider, Ob Nixilis is a known quantity to them already, because he's like an old enemy. So he's clearly been to Capenna before to try and fuck shit up. So it's an interesting kind of dynamic. But yeah, I just love the fact that there's this kind of push and pull, and the families go to each other's parties. The crescendo is open to all the families. It's not just all out and out warfare.
Yeah, and the museum is open to all as well.
Mm.
It is absolutely, yeah. It's basically 5 families that all just live together in this sort of uneasy peace.
Mm.
And gosh, I'm even just thinking right now about about Venice and sort of that old Renaissance Italy era, where you definitely had, I'm sure you had the Doge and you had the Prince of the City or whatever, but we all know that the people who are actually helping the canals, being like running the canals, who have their hands in everyone's pockets, getting the courtesans on their side, like those are the families who are keeping everything running.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like here in the UK, like, I don't get too deep into it, and there are people who know much more better than I do, but like our kind of almost folk hero mobsters were the Cray twins, and like vicious, violent psychopaths, the both of them. But they kept London running in a way that the local governments couldn't for quite some time, and it's I think every society, every metropolis, at least every sort of city society has these kinds of things. What do we think then about some of the maybe the more detailed aspects of the characters, which when new writers come in, I kind of feel like there's always something that's a wrinkle in, or like a tiny plot hole, which obviously having magic history and lore for so long kind of gets a little bit of a eyebrow raise. So when Elspeth and Giada go to the cathedral, the Angels Cathedral, we notice that Giada is clearly going to be an angel. Like it's so obvious, like it's so signposted. It's like, okay, cool, fine. But Elspeth also seems to have a similar glow about her. Is that something worth reading into? For like, do you reckon?
I feel like it might be. There's a lot. It's very difficult to, when you read the text, decide whether or not, because there is a somewhat physical similarity between Giada and Elspeth,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that they are brunettes who have tan skin with brown eyes.
Mm-hmm.
But and then there are moments where in the text where it says, Elspeth looks like she feels like she's looking into her own eyes. But I think that just has to do with the fact that that Elspeth just has such a deep connection to the white mana of that plane, to the angelic part of that plane, because she grew up in a Phyrexian dungeon. We don't she blinked out, and so it does make me wonder, to what extent she has that relationship with the angels. Also, where did the angels go? We don't really know.
No, like where are they ascending to? Like each plane seems to have something of its own afterlife implied, or like other sphere implied. Like Theros has the Theros underworld, and where are these angels going? There must be some other like realm within New Capenna, right?
Yeah, there must be some other higher plane of New Capenna that is just where the angels just went off to, and they're like, yeah, we're gonna come back when we feel like it.
Yeah.
Y'all do whatever it is you're doing down there for now. But I think it just has to do with the fact that she is a paladin, and paladins / clerics, they are faith-based archetypes, and I think that her faith is what makes her glow. I think it's just her underlying alignment. And I think that is actually very much in flavor with her actions so far on this plane, because she's still working within the confines of the system. She's not looking to overthrow it. Because deep down, she's kind of a part of it. Like when I love like the scene where she gets off the train. I'm like, oh, this is so Journey. This is like so very like small town girl coming in, trying to make her way in the world.
I mean, if we look at like all of Elspeth's like art and cards, like from like when we first got an Elspeth card all the way up until now, it's a really bold swing to have this be like the idea that this could be her home plane for something that's so modern in its kind of dress and sort of society. Only because Elspeth is the knight errant. Like all Elspeth cards and all kinds we've seen her have been very like high fantasy paladin, armor, swords, capes, all this kind of thing. So it's a real, I think it's a nice swing to kind of bring this character and to have this, the Xander makes her like a flapper dapper outfit that is essentially also armor. So it's a really nice like blend of what's going on. Like the fishnets are armored fishnets, like armored scales that look like their leggings, and I just thought it was a really nice sort of way to bring them into this modern time. But it does sort of hint that there is so much more to Capenna which we could potentially go back to,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
the old school. Yeah.
Like old Capenna. So in the stories, they also hint at what was called the Kingdom Era, the old Kingdom Era. And I think that that's where Elspeth's like tendency to be incredibly old school, like paladin-esque, like comes from, because that was the era of kingdoms. That was old Capenna was basically almost like a feudal society in the sense of like Eldraine almost. Where you had like the different families and like the different aspects of society eventually becoming the 5 families of New Capenna, which is super fun. And yeah, I think it actually, if you think about like Elspeth coming from maybe somewhere outside of New Capenna, like, because outside New Capenna does exist, it just sucks.
Yeah, I think Anello comments that he doesn't, because he mistakes her like planeswalker sort of status and otherness as being the fact that she's from beyond the old ruins or something, like
Yeah,
coming
beyond the
into the
old
city.
ruins.
Yeah,
Yeah, so he's like, you're from the boonies.
yeah.
And she's just like, no, I'm not from here. This is not from here at all. So I think it does make sense though that, you know, if those are the childhood stories that maybe she told herself as she was in the prison, the stories of old Capenna, that, you know, it makes sense for her to feel a deep sense of connection with it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean,
On
yeah,
Bant and
I love
elsewhere.
when they bring like sort of planeswalkers that have been in the game for a while and they bring them into a fresh story with a fresh lick of paint, because it never seems to take away. It only seems to add. When you have characters that can literally go anywhere in an infinite multiverse, it doesn't make sense for them to always be dressed the same way or to always act exactly the same way. Like, so whenever you add these layers on, it does feel like an adage rather than a deconstruction of their characters. So it's like I like Elspeth, so I'm really happy that she got this new thing. Tezzeret and Urabrask. Let's talk about this, right? Because we had Tezzeret come around, like obviously War of the Spark, and you know he's got a portal in his stomach, and you know he's kind of blowing up this whole idea that only planeswalkers can planeswalk between things, and you know that theory's out the window. And then he shows up in like Neon Dynasty, and he's, you know, getting all this tech from Camis, and then, you know, there's a Praetor there, and blah 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 blah. And now we have him working again with a Praetor, but not like the core 4 or 3, I suppose, now, because Shieldred got killed by.
Yeah, she got killed.
Yeah, so there's only the 3, like the Jin-Gitaxias, Elishnorn, and
Vorinclex.
Vorinclex. Yeah, they're the 3 ruling of New Phyrexia. But then Urabrask was also missing in action. So he's not working with the 3 rulers of New Phyrexia. He's now with Urabrask, seemingly, and we get this fleshed out not just in the first episode of the main story, but also in one of the side stories as well. Like, what the hell's going on? What's happening here?
I mean, I was just so happy to see my my favorite Praetor.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Shieldred within the context of EDH, and I love Elishnorn within the context of EDH. But let's be real, love the grumpy old Praetor man who's just like, keep their kids off my lawn and it's fine.
Yeah.
Don't bother me. I almost have like his voice in my head just reminds me of Bernie Sanders for some reason. I don't know. I am once again coming to ask you
to revolt against New Phyrexia.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. I was waiting for the impression to come out. That's cool.
Yeah, no. It is now canon. Urabrask sounds exactly like Bernie Sanders.
Yep,
just like Jin-Gitaxias sounds like Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. That's great. But so, I mean, we have this kind of turncoat thing from seemingly from Tezzeret. I never trust any storyline with Tezzeret.
He's such a little piece of poop. Like, oh my god, he needs to.
You refrain from saying shit. I do appreciate that.
No worries, I'm trying. But he is such a little. He's such a little turd. He's such a little like. It's like, dude, make up your mind. Where are you going to side? Like, yeah. I feel like Tezzeret for so long has been the just the almost like bumbling henchman, but not really, because he is more competent than bumbling. But he's been the evil, like, henchman for so many of Magic's biggest villains. Like, he was working for Bolus. He was like actively doing very sketchy things like during the conflicts. It's all just very, who are you? Why are you doing this? And I think a lot of it just has to do with the fact that we haven't really gotten too much insight into Tezzeret, other than him being like, well, yeah, that sucked, blah, blah, blah. And I really hope that we eventually, because we got some insight into him in the stories like a while back, but obviously he's grown a lot as a character since then. So I'd love to know why he's just flopping all over the place like a fish out of water. Are you with them? Are you against them? Are you just freaked out because they completed Tammy and you're like, oh crap? Like,
well, that's a cool idea. So, like, obviously, the last time we saw him before New Capenna was literally just in the last set of stories for Neon Dynasty, where he's working with Jin-Gitaxias to experiment on the Kami to then find a way to complicate Planeswalkers, and they succeed. completing Tamio. Tamio is the first Phyrexian Planeswalker, and we do see in the epilogue of one of the story where we see that taking place, that Tezzeret's none too happy about it, or at least he's not like super thrilled at the idea that maybe his position in the new Phyrexian world is going to be challenged, because outside of him having the planar bridge within his body, like that's now going to be an issue. And then, you know, he's obviously it was very clear that he was going to be part of this storyline when we saw Vorinclex pop up on Kaldheim, because it's like, oh, who's the only other person who can kind of bounce people around the multiverse is going to be the dude with the bridge in his belly. So I think that's a nice idea. The fact
that's a new point. Hi, Watsy. This is the new Tezzeret card.
Tezzeret. The guy with the bridge in his belly.
Belly bridge man.
Belly bridge man. I mean, there have been sillier names in recent cards. But so I think that's maybe a nice idea, that could have been the thing that turned him. I sort of feel like they're going to be building up this idea that he's been playing the long game for a while, and that maybe since the fall of Bolas, he finally felt like he could be free of being anyone's slave. And so when he kind of got taken in by the new Phyrexians, he was like, I can't do this again. Maybe, like, who's the person who I can find help? Let's go to Urabrask. Urabrask is now around. And we also get this idea as well. I'm just thinking about the details of the side story. Urabrask lets slip that Elish Norn is actively scared of Elspeth. Like, it's like Elspeth has like this kind of power over Elish Norn of being like, oh, this is actually one of the few planeswalkers that the Phyrexians might actually not like. So it's kind of cool that by the end of the main story, Elspeth is kind of front foot forward, is like, oh, I have this weapon that I think actually will destroy them. And then we get, you know, it all kind of ties together. So it's real like larger arc narrative pushing stuff. I mean, do you have any like thoughts or theories like moving forward?
I mean, I can see why, given the context, the deeper context into connection rather that Elspeth has with angels on this set, and seeing as how they managed to utilize angels in order to get rid of the old Phyrexians on New Capenna. I can see how Elspeth and her angelic ties would certainly be a threat to Elish Norn. Elish Norn has consistently, along with Jin-Gitaxias, has been one of the most intelligent, charismatic, and terrifying characters in Magic history. There is no reason why she would not know the history of her forebears and their defeat at New Capenna. So yeah, knowing that, I think it makes sense. Like if like I got heavily I don't know, if my parents got really beat up by someone from another country, and I hear like a person from that country is coming around, and I'm like, ooh, okay, I better clock you.
Yeah.
So that's I think like that's very logical, I think, for Elish Norn. The question, of course, is what has been going on in New Phyrexian since then, and Urabrask does give us an idea. Basically everyone is following Elish Norn, as we know, so not too much there, but it is intriguing to understand that the Great Furnace is actually still relatively tied off, and maybe Koth is in there somewhere. Like, I'm really hoping that we get to see Koth again. I mean, we're focusing a lot on Elspeth.
We have to. I kind of feel like they've got a lot of these characters from that period of Magic story kind of coming back in at this kind of in this section of like the story article. So I think, once we go to Dominaria United, there'll be another little hint, and then like next year when we finally go to Phyrexia, I thought they were going to do this like last year. I thought we were going to be going to Phyrexia, but they're really playing the long game with it. Like, I think we'll definitely see Koth. So in terms of like weaponry and MacGuffins at this point, Khan still has the Silex, which is
he's got his big duffel bag.
He's got his big duffel bag. We see Teferi on Innistrad. I can't remember whether it was in Tangles, what we were talking about earlier with Ren, or whether it was in the main story. Teferi sort of has this idea on Innistrad that his magic... Oh, no, that's it. In Tangles, he was talking about... He was learning from Ren that his magic maybe could be looked at in a different way, and he could potentially bring Zalfir back from being phased out of existence.
Absolutely.
I kind of feel like that might be just his story, but I kind of feel it's a bit too juicy to not also be something to do with the Phyrexian arc.
I think it's gonna be. I think we might see Zalfir come back next set. I think that with
United,
I think that'd
be great. Like, and then like
it's United, and I'm like, it one piece is missing. It's Zalfir, and then all these people are gonna come back and be like, what just happened?
They're gonna blip back in. But the Phyrexians, for their part, not only have they learned how to Phyrexianize Planeswalkers, like we saw in this last set, if we remember all the way back to Kaldheim, the epilogue of that story was Vorinclex taking the sap of the world tree from Essica, one of the gods. So are we going to see like god creators versus like a new sort of vamped up version of the Planeswalkers? Like, how's this going to all shake out?
I mean, so far we have President here of Wizards of the Coast loving to throw dead gods, well, like scary enemy gods at us.
Yeah.
Where that would just be 3 for 3. So I
Yeah,
would
for
not be
sure.
surprised if we
Phyrexian
see
gods that can planeswalk, like crazy.
Phyrexian gods that can planeswalk, or we just see like a super Saiyan version of Elish Norn when we come back. Like, I think that would be so phenomenal.
Yeah.
I hope she's a really good card. OG Elish Norn's already devastating.
Yeah, quite. Like, I mean, they've been doing really well with these new praise cards. Like, I mean, people have been kind of whinging a little bit about how clunky Orobrask is, but I kind of love it. Like, you know, the kind of impulsive draw. Like, everyone gets an impulsive draw. Like, it fits his character in this context because he's not really with anyone, but he just doesn't want to see Elish Norn succeed. So it's like, fine, I'm going to exile all of your stuff at the top of your libraries. If you can cast it, fine, but whatever, go away. Like, I really like that idea.
Again, the Bernie Sanders of
Yeah. No, I just
Phyrexia.
don't want the Democrats or the Republicans to win. I just want everyone to have a nice time. Can we just not have a nice time?
Can we just get Medicare for all? That would be super great. Like,
Phyrexia would be so much better if not everyone was Phyrexianized. Can we just yeah.
I also, I mean, it also makes sense that Orobrask is a little bit more clunky because he's not doing so hot, right?
No.
Like, he has been trying to push back against Elish Norn and her followers, the Porcelain Legion and whatnot. So it totally makes sense that he would just be like, "Hey, hi, I'm not doing too great. Please help."
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to see where we go with New Phyrexia. I'm excited to see how that plane has changed since last we saw it, because I mean, are the Mirrodins still there? What's happening? I don't know. It's so great.
Yeah,
But
I'm very excited.
But then I'm like, what are we going to do once we finish the Phyrexian cycle? Like, that I think will be the last big overarching story that we've seen so far.
Yes, but I mean, obviously,
Next it's Slivers.
Well,
Slivers
I was
are gonna
thinking
come
Slivers, but also I saw Kristen Gregory. Something that they posted up recently was that they first started playing Magic, I think it's something like 6 years ago, with like Shadows over Innistrad or, you know, Eldritch Moontime. And I was thinking, wow, has it really been like that long ago? Because that was the last time we really saw the Eldrazi with Emrakul sealing themselves away in the moon of Innistrad. So really, by the time that we get to next year, it will be a long enough time that has passed that if we finish off the Phyrexian cycle, I think they'll just do that. I think they'll just go back to Emrakul, back on the moon of Innistrad.
Oh. Oh no, Emrakul, my best girl. She just wants to live alone in her penthouse until everyone calms down, and then she'll come back out. I would love to see that. I would absolutely love to see that. I think, you know, there's also been a few other Planeswalker characters that we've seen kind of pop up and then run away. So there's Obnixilis, but we've also seen Tybalt. Tybalt just like ran into Kaldheim, set everything on fire, and then ran away. Clearly in league with the Phyrexians or some, I think. And then we also
Tybalt
saw...
has the seed of Vorinclex in them. That was a little line that's kind of been, I don't know whether that got chucked away like in the narrative now, but I think we're going to see a Phyrexianized Tybalt.
I think we're going to see a Phyrexian. That would make perfect sense for him, actually. Couldn't have happened to a better guy. But Nahiri is also a character that we haven't seen in a while. I mean, we saw her come back in Zendikar, return to Zendikar. And she, I mean, that was more of a misunderstanding, I think, miscommunication between her and Nissa. But yeah, I mean, that's another character that I would like to see more of. We have established her as a proper villain. Who's just not used to living in this post-mending world.
Oh, thank you. So many people defend Nahiri because Nahiri isn't necessarily out and out evil, but I often sort of find that, like, no, Nahiri is is a villain. Like, there's no getting around it. Maybe something of an anti-hero to the extreme, like you could maybe sort of say that, but especially in Zendikar Rising, they were aping for the return of the fascistic core empire. Like, there's
Yeah,
no getting around that.
there's no getting around that. It's a lot like, you've got your great uncle who's still very much a racist at Thanksgiving, and you're like, yeah, you're not. I mean, you're not like inherently a bad person, but
Yeah.
you just have very not great thoughts about how the world should be run. And I think that's
Yeah.
exactly how Nahiri is. And I wonder what might happen with her. I mean, that's just a character who we got to see. She got a little bit of development and then she blipped out as well. So I'm hoping, I don't think that we're going to lose any villain. We're always gonna have someone to fight in Magic the Gathering story. But yeah, I do wonder who it'll be next. But seriously though, what was Obnixless doing on New Capenna?
What was he doing? What was the point? I mean, was he just trying to get Halo? Like, what's the thing?
Like, was he there like during War of the Spark and they just like got forcibly pulled onto Ravnica and then he's like, oh fine, I have to like carry around Dak Faden, and then like runs and he's like, okay, we're done, bye.
I will say I did really enjoy a return of Obnixless being like just so unbelievably powerful. I mean, he's got a red-black card in the set for like color pie reasons, but like this is like uber black Obnixless, because in War of the Spark, again, 36 Planeswalkers, new characters coming in, a writer that didn't give a fuck about the franchise, blah, 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 blah. Like, Obnixless was just kind of a dopey demon dude who was just kind of there. Whereas this is a return of Obnixless being like, no, I'm a serious problem for everybody, and I should be taken seriously. And I kind of did enjoy that. Although we had no idea what he was there for.
I did enjoy that. I just wish I knew why. Like, why New Capenna? Like, why here? Is there something about Halo? Idea. Like, what? And it says, like you mentioned, like he's been around here for a while. So yeah, was he really doing this like during the events of War of the Spark? Like, did he just, after he got his spark back in Battle for Zendikar, was he just like, I'm just gonna bite, and then so he goes over to New Capenna, and that's where he's been, with the exception of War of the Spark. Like, he's just been there wearing pinstripes, living his best life.
Yeah, no idea.
Oh well. Why?
He just needed to be there. He just needed to be there.
It's just every now and then he just needs to conquer some plane just to get out of his system.
Yeah. Cool. We'll see you next time, I guess. We'll see you on Phyrexia when that comes around.
It's like, and it sucks because he looks so good. You're like,
it's a good design. Like that first ever, I think it was the first bit of key art that they showed, which really, I think, now that we know the character of Xander much better, was like, oh yeah, that got spoiled. Like the first image they ever showed was Xander dying, because it was Obnixless holding a dead Xander by the scruff of his like coat, and that was like, oh, this is gonna be New Capenna. Look at Obnixless in a very sharp suit with this demon dude that he's just killed. And I was like, oh yeah, that looks pretty cool. And then we all forgot about it, and then it happened in the story, and we were like, no, Xander. It's like that was the first thing they showed was him dying. But
yeah, it's sad. But yeah, speaking of things that we wish had gotten more of coverage, the Riveteers. We did not get a Riveteers story.
Nope.
Apparently, they were supposed to have one focusing on Jaxus, who is like it's like every sapphic like dream, just this amazing red-haired woman in suspenders, just like boxing, and it's like, and apparently her whole backstory was like she was supposed to summon demons, like the demons that she's fought and have lost to her. Like she summons the spirits of those demons, and then as it turns out, the what's her name, the dragon who's in charge of the Riveteers got
Zeodora, is that
Zeodora? Yes. So she got a little like jealous of Jaxus, and
as
so
dragons do.
There was supposed to be a bit of a rumble. And I really am sad that we didn't get much of an insight into this particular family, because if we think about the 1920s and 30s, like unions and people coming together to build these amazing structures, that was a huge part of the era. And I wish we got to know more. So.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, classically speaking, because I'm a big Orzhov player, and when it comes to Ravnica, like the Orzhov are my guild, because, you know, I grew up in a I wasn't. It wasn't a heavily oppressive like upbringing in this religion, but I did grow up Roman Catholic with Irish parents, and so like the kind of iconography of like cathedrals and Catholicism, and the kind of much more business like aspects of them are not lost on me, being a lefty liberal who grew up Catholic. So it was very fun to almost like exercise a lot of like personal things, being like, oh, in this fantasy game, I can play my personal villains. That's pretty cool. So like when the Five Families came out, although smartly the characterization of them didn't turn out to be this basic, but like the maestros are the sort of equivalent of being like old money, very sort of elaborate and exuberant and all that kind of thing. So I was kind of initially thinking, yeah, I'll go Grixis and go maestros, but the Riveteers are actually, I think, the faction on New Capenna that I personally am like excited by, because in a yeah, you're right, it's the workers' rights aspect, and it's in the idea in this very industrialized city to have one of the families be the people who are maybe at the bottom of the social strata, but are maybe the most important in this given society. They're the builders, they're the maintainers, and to have their like dragon overlord as well, like it's just all very cool aesthetic and a very sort of visceral family to kind of get behind. Like it's theirs is the will of like emotion and human rights, and it hits you right in the chest of being like, yeah, everyone should be stood up for, and then to not get really much of anything from them. We see Vivian is observing one of their rallies when Tezzeret first bumps into her, and we also see a bunch of brawlers being part of the kind of the Warriors style run through the city of like all the different factions trying to get a hold of the font. But yeah, other than that, nothing much. Massive
Yeah,
shame.
yeah. It is a real shame because I'm I, I'm just thinking about um, this era was really important because it really saw the advent of communism and sort of, again, workers' rights unions
Mm,
kind of entering the public sphere, the public discussion, like in a very prominent way.
mm,
Um, and honestly, the first thing I think of are just like the various murals that were commissioned um, by the NWA for like Diego Rivera and a few other really fantastic artists of just these workers coming together, um, building these amazing structures and works of art with the sweat of their brow, with like they transform steel into structure. That
mm,
is an incredible feat. um and yeah, I would have just really loved to know more about how that worked,
mm.
because in my head I can kind of create threads between a dragon overlord and all of these workers, but I'm also like, I would love to see that spelled out a little bit more. I would love to get
Yeah,
more insight into that relationship. Like how are they how does this family work? You know, we
yeah,
have a very clear idea, like the Obscura, the Breakers are basically a giant corrupt law firm.
mm,
The Maestros, and the Cabaretti as well. Like, but we just it's, I guess, maybe people thought it was a little bit too on the nose. Like maybe they don't have to spell it out because we know how unions work in real life.
yeah. But I mean, it's the Ravnican problem, right? Where if you have the 10 guilds of Ravnica, and it's always kind of like the meme at this point of being like something like the Dimir. How can the Dimir be part of Ravnican society when they're constantly trying to like subvert it all the time, or like, or even something like the Rakdos? Like, who are these people that are just going around like being completely chaotic, but they're still part of the symbiosis of like the sort of guilds? Having this family, which is, although it's under the sort of theme, I guess, not to reduct it too much or reduce it too much, but under the theme of workers' rights, they're essentially the revolutionary faction within the Five Families, but they still have to be part of the structure. So yeah, you're right. How can you be part of something you're constantly trying to buck against and revolutionize? It would have been nice to have seen some idea of how that gets balanced out, because we did see it with the other families, like they are all against each other, but they're also invested in this structure. So there must have been a way for the Riveteers to have kind of been a part of that.
Especially
Below,
since they make the structure, right? So it's,
quite, yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I really wish we got more insight, but I suppose that's gonna have to wait until we get to Return to New Capenna.
New Capenna, brand new
New
Capenna.
yes, return to new Capenna, new old Capenna.
Oh
um
man, I can't wait.
yeah, and I like one last thing I just wanted to touch on there. Like, I don't know if you've
Mm.
ever seen Metropolis or M.
Hmm.
um but I really love the idea that, I really love that they kept to this idea and they incorporated of like a city having two sides,
Mm.
and like a light side and a dark side. And I'm so glad that they kept to all of these fantastic noir and German expressionist film tropes. So super fun. Also, it was like I see like in a lot of like things like Dr. Caligari's like the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari
Hmm.
and all this like other really fantastic visual references. The art for this set is absolutely banging.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, that Cubist Brokers.
Oh,
Um, oh gosh, that what was it?
is it the Brawler? The Disciplined
Broker.
Duelist? Is that the one you're thinking
No,
of?
no. Disciplined Duelist is classic Art Deco.
Yeah.
There's a Cubist, specifically Cubist broker um broker card, which I can't recall. It's not Broker's Charm,
Sure.
but it is fantastic. I just looked and was like, ah,
Yeah.
Picasso.
I mean the as you say, like the stylized sort of aspects and pulling on all those different influences has definitely helped the visual of the set, because it's a weird one where when they announced New Capenna and they kind of dropped what the theme was going to be, people were like, this isn't fantasy enough, like this isn't far enough away to be considered fantasy. But the fact that they made the smart move to be like, no, we're not going to just have like a car, or like, as a car as we know it, we are going to be like, this is going to be a stylized version of the stylized versions of this time period. It's like, okay, cool, now we get it. Like, and you see it in the dress and the architecture and everything. Like, smart move. Yeah, big time.
Absolutely
Yeah.
smart move and very bang on to a lot of the genre fiction that we've been seeing nowadays. Like,
Mm.
I think that it perfectly like if anything, it reminds me of the city by China Mieville, or Perdido Street Station. I think
Mm.
that's also another really great literary reference for this particular set.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, I think that's going to do it for us talking about New Capenna's stories. Thank you so much for once again
Yeah.
joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
For the listeners who might have not heard the last episode, or might have heard the last episode but just want to revamp, where can people find you?
So you can find me mostly on Twitter, where I tweet about many things, mostly Magic the Gathering, occasionally a lewd potato that I find at the farmer's market, or other items as well. I am also a ceramicist, an artist. I'm also really big into D&D and to in the TTRPG space as well. So you can find my me performing on. There's a couple of shows that are out right now. One is Price of Progress, which is Magic with Zuby,
Hmm.
and there is another called Betwixt Light and Shadow, which will be premiering, I believe, next Sunday. So where I get to play like some like Nephilims. It's really interesting.
Oh, cool.
It's gonna be really fun. And you can also see some of my ceramics work on Instagram at Kiln Fiend Pottery. And if you want to take a look at my site, it's kilnfiendpottery.com. You can see all my past work.
we
I
we did link that in the last episode description, so we'll bang
Oh,
that up
thank
again.
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was a lot of fun. I make all sorts of stuff. I'm hoping to get back to it soon. I got a kiln. It's literally like 25 feet away from
Oh,
me
it
over there.
arrived,
And
didn't it? The new kiln arrived.
the new kiln arrived, and I'm just like been trying to chase down this person to help install it, because I'm not going to install a Firebox of Doom
No,
myself. I'm not
I
an
wouldn't.
electrician.
One of my favorite of your magic related pieces, because you've done a few magic sort of commissions, like pottery wise, is that you did
Yeah.
there was a bowl you did when Theros Beyond Death came out, where it was a
Yes.
bowl where it had like the reliefs of Elspeth.
Yes, the
Talking about
Elspeth
Elspeth.
Bowl.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was that was a lot of fun. I had discovered a couple of new fun techniques for surface design that I was playing with. So I had been figuring out this sort of galaxy painting technique combined with this really cool new glaze that I found that's
Mm.
still my favorite glaze. It's called Cosmic Tea Dust by Amico. It's this black glitter. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's actually one thing I love about it too is that it is microwave safe and food safe. So you
Oh
can
wow.
absolutely, yeah. So I think I gave that bowl to Desert Bus to auction this year, and um last year I did like a massive Zendikar Hedron planter, and
That
I
was
think
it.
this.
Yeah. That was the next one I was going to talk about.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, yeah. That
Yeah.
was a lot of fun. Also a pain to put together, because I had to carve all the runes and then paint all the runes and then weather it
Oh, I can't
all,
imagine. That sounds like a pain in the ass.
glaze it. I mean, it went through a whole thing. It was a whole journey. And then this year, um, I don't know. I haven't seen too much yet, but the obvious thing I want to make this year, I think, is the Alexander pot from Elden Ring.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, because it's just so great. Unless something comes out between now and then in the Magic Sphere that's like, oh, I need to make that. I've been playing a lot of Elden Ring with my partner, and I'm like, I need to create something for this best boy, this immense jar man. I love him so much. He's such a dork.
Awesome. Well, you can find us on Twitter at mtflavoring. Emails go to mtflavoring@gmail.com. My personal Twitter is at AndyManface. Nathan's is at FoxInTheMoon. Once again, Michelle Rapp, thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure I'll be pestering you again. I'll give it a break this time. I won't just do back-to-back episodes forever now, but I'll give it a break. But I'm sure we'll meet again on this podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
No worries. Well, all that remains for me to say is thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.